Hey everybody, welcome back for another game break. Hope you're having a good Sunday so far. So the game I want to talk about today and review is The Messenger. And now, like a lot of you, we've probably all had those instances where one game inevitably leads us to another. And that is very much the case with The Messenger. I didn't really have any intention of playing it. Yes, I had heard about it, and yes, I thought it looked interesting, but I just never really could find the time to fit it in my gaming calendar. But then Sabotage Studios, the studio that made The Messenger, announced a little Kickstarter to help fund their next project, Sea of Stars. Take one quick second and look at this game. Remind you of anything? Yeah, it reminds me of something too, Chrono Trigger. And full disclosure, I'm a backer of this game. I helped back it on Kickstarter, and just seeing Sea of Stars and the promise this game held, I needed to know more about Sabotage Studios, so I made a concentrated effort to fit in The Messenger in my gaming schedule, and that's why I played it. I'm not going to say anything else about Sea of Stars at this point because this video is mostly about The Messenger. I don't want to do it a disservice by talking about Sea of Stars the whole time because The Messenger is a really good game and it deserves to be talked about. But Sea of Stars did lead me to it, so it deserves to be mentioned, and I'll be doing a full video about it later because I've been meaning to for quite a while now. So just so you know, there is a Chrono Trigger-like game coming from a proven studio, and I think that is something everyone should be excited about. But now let's get to The Messenger. So The Messenger, when I first saw footage of it floating around, I thought it was a very interesting concept, being able to go from 8-bit graphics to 16-bit graphics on the fly, so to speak. So I thought that was very interesting, and I very much have a soft spot for 16-bit graphic gaming in my heart because the Super Nintendo was what made me a gamer. Yes, I had a Nintendo Entertainment System as well, but I wasn't quite fully into gaming yet at that point. So I do have a soft spot for both, just to varying degrees. So being able to switch between the two was awesome. And it ties into the gameplay as well. It's just not purely for aesthetic reasons. And another thing about the graphics, the backgrounds and the settings, both in 8-bit and 16-bit form, they look great. They look great in either world. Obviously, the 16-bit graphics are going to have a bit more detail, but they look pretty damn solid in the 8-bit form as well. And the 8-bit and 16-bit graphics, something else I love about them is they tie directly into the game's soundtrack as well. You'll have the 8-bit tracks for obviously the 8-bit graphics and the 16-bit tracks for the 16-bit graphics. And you're just constantly going between the two and you're just getting different arrangements of the same theme as you go between them. And I just thought that was a great touch and I thought it was awesome. And not only is it just a cool little novelty having the different themes and different eras of gaming, but the soundtrack in and of itself is excellently done. And it punches you right in the face as soon as you get to the Autumn Hills, which is right after the introductory sequence of the game. Gameplay-wise, The Messenger is a very linear experience initially. It's very much just a side scroller, but at about, I'd say maybe just past the halfway point of the game, it opens up into pretty much a full-blown Metroidvania. So it is going to be linear for that first part of the experience, but it is still very much quite enjoyable, I found. And the Metroidvania was just kind of icing on the cake at the very end, but it definitely did make it a better game overall. And the thing with the graphics, the 8-bit and the 16-bit graphics, is very much when the Metroidvania part of the game starts, you're freely switching between the two and it's changing the environments. And that sounds like it might be confusing if the environments are changing constantly between these two different graphical styles, but it never really was. The game was constructed in such a way that when the graphics would change and the environments would change, you were very quickly able to orient yourself correctly. I was never really confused at any given point about what to do. So that is something I will say to the game's praise. Now, the game's difficulty is a fun little topic. So by and large, I found the game's difficulty was quite fair. A lot of the really challenging portions of the game are optional, where you can go and collect these power seals in order to unlock an endgame item. So you don't have to do those if you don't want. But in terms of the gameplay, you do have to go through to get to the end of the game. Generally, once again, kind of like Ori and the Will of the Wisps, it was very much an easy breezy time for most of the game, and then you would hit a wall and you die like 20 times in this one spot. But it was a little bit more severe in this game versus Ori and the Will of the Wisps for comparison's sake. I found when I would hit a wall in this game, I would be at that wall for a bit longer. It would just take me a little bit more effort and just a little bit more kind of ingenuity in trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Whereas in Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a little bit more clear cut what I was not doing. Whereas in this game, it was just, it just took a little bit more time to get there. But while it could be frustrating, it was never to the point where it really was a detriment to my enjoyment of the game. The elation and the happiness I would feel at actually overcoming these barriers quickly eclipsed any frustration I might have had before that point. And the other thing in terms of difficulty was the boss fights. A lot of the boss fights, once again, were fair encounters. You will probably die at least a couple of times to most of them. There were a couple that were just, oh man, I was banging my head against the wall against some of these bosses. But a lot of them I found didn't offer me too much trouble. I knew what I had to do. It was all about just getting their patterning down. So by and large, I did enjoy the boss fights as well. And the fact that the controls in this game were really tight and you only had so many abilities at your disposal made it easy to understand it, and it made the game flow well. Yes, you were limited in terms of the amount of abilities you could learn and use compared to maybe some other Metroidvanias, but that only meant you needed to become a master at using them, because you will run into certain points of this game where you need to use every tool at your disposal well and at the right time and appropriately. And I can't go into too much detail with this last part, but one thing I really liked about Ori and the Will of the Wisps was there were some epic chase sequences in it, and there is at least one of those in this game. And while there might not be as many in The Messenger, the one that they do have is excellent. So something I do want to make a point of talking about as well is The Messenger's story and its humor. So generally with Metroidvanias, I don't really think story generally, and I'm sure a lot of you don't either. But the humor in The Messenger is excellent. It is very self-aware throughout the entire game, and it has, in my opinion, one of the best shopkeepers ever in a video game. I loved the banter and dialogue between the messenger and this shopkeeper whenever I got the opportunity to enjoy it. And I would always ask him, you can ask him to tell you stories in this game. And I would always enjoy listening to it because they were honestly just really funny most of the time, and I'd always get a laugh out of it. And it added a very distinct flavor to the game in general. The fact it was very self-aware of what it was and being very lighthearted. At the same time, there were some serious things going on, but it never became melodramatic. But I still was invested in the game's lore that it did have, and part of the reason why I wanted to play this game is because it is a sequel to the Kickstarter game Sea of Stars that got me involved in this game to begin with, so that was another reason I wanted to play it, so I could get all the references that are forthcoming in that game. And I was able to get references from Sea of Stars in this game because they are tied together. And I just loved it, honestly, beginning to end, even though it was, once again, full of humor and almost kind of breaking that fourth wall. It's something I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of you will too if you know that going into it. It was something that I totally didn't expect. I thought this was going to be a serious game. It was going to take itself seriously, and it didn't at all. And not only is it breaking the fourth wall and the shopkeeper it's just, I don't know, it's just something about it that it was just something that maybe that I needed at that time. I needed that bit of brevity or lightheartedness that I didn't know I did, and maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much. But awesomely done. And the story, the conclusion was quite satisfying as well. I did like the way things tied up, and they very much did leave it open for a sequel, but it seems they're doing a prequel instead. So we'll have to see where that goes. But all in all, very enjoyable. So in conclusion, it was a solid Metroidvania. I enjoyed the gameplay. I really enjoyed swapping between the 8-bit and 16-bit graphics. Loved the soundtrack, loved the humor. The story was entertaining and I was invested in what was going on. Boss battles were fair. The gameplay itself was quite fair. Yes, there were those walls, but getting over them made all the frustration pretty much worthwhile. So that's a plus too. But no, I've enjoyed the last two Metroidvania games I've played immensely. And I enjoyed this game a lot. And having seen the degree of quality this game has makes me incredibly excited for Sea of Stars now. And that's why I wanted to play this game, so I could get a better frame of reference for what I have invested my money in. And I'm not disappointed. Because if they could do this good a job with a side-scroller / Metroidvania game, I have a lot of confidence they can do very well with a Chrono Trigger style RPG too. And it just makes me even more excited for Sea of Stars, seeing what they did with this game. So all in all, excellent Metroidvania game, definitely worth trying out. Just go listen to the soundtrack on YouTube by itself, if anything. It doesn't matter if it's 8-bit or 16-bit. They got a lot of good tracks for the soundtrack. So anyway, that is my review for The Messenger. An excellent game. Go give it a shot. And thank you for joining me for this game break on another Sunday, and I'll see you later.